In the previous videos, we used the specific factor model to figure out the distributional effect of international trade. Okay, we understand that trade creates winners and losers. Now, here, when we head towards the end of this chapter, we have one more topic, which is international labor mobility. In other words, we're going to discuss immigration, okay? And we will do this at the end of this chapter because we're going to continue using the specific factor model, all right? Immigration is a hot topic, and in the U.S., we've been discussing debating, the immigrants from India, China, Mexico, their influences upon American society, right? Or U.S. economy. I guess this debate has been, going for decades, right? And even in Europe, in recent decades, we saw that millions of people fled, for example, from Syria and Ukraine, right? And they went to Europe, okay? Germany, France, Poland, UK, right? So, these immigrants also changed the European economies in many ways, okay? And so here, let's see what specific factor model could help us better understand their economic influence. Okay. Now, as we said, we're gonna do, the specific factor model. The good news is the model we're gonna use here is sort of the simplified version of the one we discussed before. Okay. Now, let me explain why here. If you look at the setup of the model here, it's going to be one good, which is food, two factors of production, land and labor, two economies, home and foreign. Okay, so this is so-called 1 by 2 by 2 model. Okay, now upon this moment, I hope you should already know that it is the simplified version because in our previous discussions, the model has two goods, right? Cloth and food, three factors, labor, land, and capital, right? And two economies, home and foreign. In other words, we have been exposed to 2 by 3 by 2 model. Here, what we're going to do is 1 by 2 by 2 model, so it's supposed to be easier. Okay. Now, the purpose of this theoretical analysis is to figure out the income distribution between the two trading economies. Okay, and we're going to see the change in the welfare of workers and landlords. Okay, because remember, we only have two factors, so we only get two group of people here. Okay, and one is workers, the other would be landlords. Okay. One thing we would like to point out at the beginning of our discussion here is there's no nominal prices or wage in the model. Okay, no nominal prices or wage in the model. Now, previously, when we used the specific factor model, we do use the prices of products, right? And we also have the nominal wage, W, right? But here we don't want to deal with these guys simply because we're looking at the change in two economies, home and foreign. And if we need to compare the nominal variables, like price and wage, then we have to figure out the exchange rate between the two currencies. That would be a little too complicated, okay? And that requires definitely the international finance background, okay? So here we think, it's going to be easier if we simply focused upon the real wage, and we believe that's sufficient enough, okay? Now, how are we going to measure welfare of labor? It's very simple. Remember, real wage, W over P, right? Nominal wage divided by price is equal to marginal product of labor, MPL, right? So we're going to look at MPL in home and foreign and see how the welfare of labor changes because of immigration, okay? We're going to make assumption that home has more labor than foreign. As you could imagine, this assumption is just to help us simplify our analysis. You can easily make the opposite assumption. In other words, foreign has more labor than home. Okay, this is not gonna change the methods of our analysis. Okay, of course, the conclusion would be opposite if you use the opposite assumption. Okay, and we have a labor constraint here. So the global labor supply is given, right? And we're going to consider two situations. Basically, it's a comparison, for a situation before and after. Okay, before here means what if there's no international immigration? In other words, two economies are isolated. Okay, and then the second situation would be, what if the immigration is allowed? Okay, so people can go across the border. Okay, and this would be the situation after. Okay, so let's do the graphical analysis. All right. Now, this graph, I hope you find it familiar with. Okay, because it is very similar to the one we used before, okay, in that 2x3x2 specific factor model. Okay, now the only difference is probably here. We're looking at the real wage, as we said before, right? We don't want to look at the nominal thing. So here, the vertical axis on your left-hand side is marginal product of labor, okay? And then, I'm sorry, MPL in home, okay? On your right-hand side, MPL star, that's the real wage in foreign, okay? And then, remember, they still have this downward sloping MPL curve because of law of diminishing returns to labor, right? And but here we won't multiply MPL by P because, as we said, we don't want to deal with the price. Okay. For the foreign MPL star, it looks like it's upward sloping, but remember, this guy has been flipped, as we said, right? So what we should do is just look at, from the upper right corner, and we move down to the left, the lower left corner, right? So we still see that LDR thing, all right? And then on the horizontal axis, we see, the amount of labor in home and foreign. And remember, we have the global labor constraint, right? So the total amount of labor here is given, all right? Okay, so here, once we understand the basics of this graph, then we can go ahead and do our analysis. Remember, our assumption is home has more labor than foreign, right? So that's why here we marked L1 at this point. In other words, at the beginning, home has the labor which goes from O to L1, okay? And the amount of labor in foreign is O star to L1, okay? And then we said that at the beginning, the two economies are isolated from each other, so there's no labor movement allowed. And then what we find is in home, if you go up from L1 and hit the home's MPL curve, then you get point C here. That means the real wage in home. Okay, if you go to the left, then that shows us the real wage in home. And then if you want to find the real wage in foreign, again, starting from L1 as well, and go all the way up and hit foreign's MPL curve, okay? That's going to be MPL star, right? And you find point B, and you go to the right axis, you find that's a real wage in foreign, okay? Apparently, the real wage in foreign is higher than that in home, okay? But again, people are not allowed to cross the border and pursue a higher wage at this point, right? So we find that here definitely the labor or the workers in foreign enjoys a higher living standard than their counterparts in home. Okay, oops, I'm sorry. And now we can think about what's going to happen when labor is allowed to cross the border. Okay, in other words, immigration will take place. So here we find that, as we said before, because foreign has a higher living standard, so people in home would like to migrate to foreign, pursuing a higher wage, right? Now, if that happens, then the labor amount in home would decrease, and that in foreign would increase, right? Now, when labor in home decreases, we're going to move up along its MPL curve, okay? Remember, the fewer amount of labor means the higher productivity of the last unit of labor in production, right? Because of LDR, law of diminishing returns to labor, right? So we're moving up along the MPL towards A, right? And in foreign, it's going to be the opposite because it accepts more labor from home. So it's going to move down along its MPL star curve, okay? It's going to move down because the more labor it receives from home, then the last unit of labor becomes less productive, right? All right, so we find that this process will continue until they both hit point A, right? So at that point, we find that the wage here, real wage, I mean, in both countries is equal, right? So there's no incentive for people to continue moving across the border, right? In other words, the two economies achieves the same real wage or same standard of living, okay? That's actually the first important conclusion we're going to draw here, which is the immigration leads to the convergence of real wage between the two economies, okay? So we're going to see a convergence of the welfare of labor between the two economies. And we're also going to say that, this orange area here, ABC, represents extra output produced due to the migration, okay? However, I'm going to leave this for you guys to figure it out, okay? And bring your thoughts to our class discussion, okay? Again, why this orange area represents the additional output produced, okay? This is something about the MPL or the area below the MPL curve. What does that represent, okay? So here I give you a hint, and I hope you can figure this out. This is something you should already learn in intermediate microeconomics.